"Excuse me, could you move? Some of us actually have appointments." The woman's voice sliced through City Hall like broken glass. Her navy Armani blazer contrasted sharply against Ben Carter's faded flannel, her Louboutin heels clicking dismissively on marble floors. 7-year-old Mia clutched her father's calloused hand, homemade wooden doll pressed to her chest. "Listen. Ben." She read his name from the wrinkled permit with disgust. "I don't know what pathetic shed you're legitimizing, but I'm here on real business. Sterling development. We actually contribute to this town's economy." Her emerald eyes swept over his paint-stained jeans with theatrical disdain. "Some people desperately need to learn their place." 30 minutes later, the explosion turned the lobby into chaos. Through acrid smoke and debris, Ben spotted her crumpled beneath twisted steel beams, crimson spreading across her pristine blazer. Without hesitation, he swept Mia to safety and dove back into the wreckage. As he pressed his torn shirt against her bleeding temple, her eyes fluttered open. What she whispered changed everything he thought he knew about the explosion, about her, and about why someone had just tried to kill them both. 6 months earlier, Ben Carter had owned a corner office overlooking Boston Harbor and a brownstone in Beacon Hill that smelled like Jennifer's lavender candles. MIT diploma on the wall, structural engineering contracts worth millions, and Friday nights discussing private school applications over wine. The accident happened on a Tuesday in March, rain turning the interstate into a skating rink of twisted metal and shattered dreams. Jennifer's funeral lasted 30 minutes, but dismantling their life took 3 months of methodical decisions made with engineering precision. By June, Ben and Mia were driving north toward Riverside Falls, Maine, population 3,000 and declining, where his grandfather had once taught him to fix broken things with his hands instead of his mind. The trailer on Elm Street cost $300 monthly and didn't require employment verification. Mia cried the first night on a mattress that smelled like other people's abandoned hopes. "I want to go home, Daddy." Ben held her until the tears stopped, whispering promises about new beginnings while carving her first wooden doll from driftwood he'd found on the beach. By morning, her smile made every splinter worthwhile. Mrs. Peterson hired him to fix her rotted porch, paying in cash and blueberry muffins, her arthritic hands counting 20s with careful dignity. Word spread through the community like ripples on still water. Squeaky doors, loose floorboards, and gradually enough work to rent workshop space behind Murphy's Diner. Carter Woodworks occupied 50 square feet and smelled like sawdust and possibility. Mia did homework at Ben's workbench while he restored antique chairs and built custom shelves, her presence making the cramped space feel like home. Miss Rodriguez called after Mia's first school week. "She's bright but withdrawn. Any major changes recently?" Ben stared at the phone, unsure how to explain that their universe had collapsed and reformed around a 7-year-old's resilience and his own desperate need to provide stability. The Sterling development controversy had been brewing for months, coffee shop debates growing heated over luxury resort plans. Mrs. Miller's farm, 4 generations of family history, received weekly calls from real estate agents. "They can offer millions," she told anyone listening. "But roots don't have price tags." Ben had tried staying neutral in community arguments, focused on keeping his small business afloat and Mia happy. The building permit visit was routine necessity, approval needed for workshop expansion that would accommodate larger restoration projects. He'd arrived early, with organized paperwork, standard fees, and no expectation of encountering someone who could strip away rebuilt confidence with casually cruel observations. The woman had studied him like a laboratory specimen, cataloging visible poverty markers and dismissing him as irrelevant to serious business. Her contempt had been clinical, professional, designed to establish hierarchy through public humiliation. What she couldn't have known was that Ben Carter had once signed contracts for skyscrapers, that his current circumstances reflected choice rather than failure, or that saving her life would reveal truths neither expected. Emergency sirens wailed as paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, checking vitals and preparing transport. "Are you injured, sir?" one asked, noting blood on Ben's shirt and cuts from clearing debris. "Nothing serious," Ben replied, though his ribs ached where marble chunks had struck him. His concern centered on Mia, pressed against Officer Bradley's uniform, wooden doll clutched with white-knuckled intensity. "Daddy, is the lady okay?" Her innocent question cut deeper than physical wounds, reminding him that children witness everything adults think they've hidden. Rotor blades filled the air above damaged City Hall as a sleek helicopter circled once before landing in the parking lot, downwash sending papers swirling like mechanical snow. David Sterling emerged with 2 suited companions, his presence charging the atmosphere with barely contained authority. Family resemblance showed in sharp jawlines and the way he moved through chaos like Moses parting seas, officials stepping aside without instruction. "Where is she?" His voice cut through emergency vehicle noise and shouting responders. Eyes found Ben immediately, taking inventory of blood-stained flannel and protective posture near his daughter. What happened?" It wasn't really a question, more demand for information from someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Ben felt 7 years old, called to the principal's office for unknown transgressions. "Explosion trapped your daughter under debris. I helped extract her." Sterling's calculation replaced concern, as whispered consultation with lean, predatory companions shifted his expression subtly. "David Sterling, we're grateful for your assistance." No handshake offered, just filed information and careful assessment of Ben's obvious financial circumstances. "I trust you understand the sensitive nature of recent events." The paramedics loaded Alexis Sterling onto stretchers, her pale face contrasting stark white sheets, while David's protective tracking suggested complicated family dynamics beneath surface concern. "She'll receive optimal medical care. Money presents no obstacles." Both statement and reminder of vast social distance between their respective positions in established hierarchy. As helicopter prepared departure, Sterling turned back with final consideration. "Mr. Carter, I'd appreciate private discussion when circumstances settle. Perhaps tomorrow morning? We may share mutual interests requiring exploration." Request felt like politely worded command, and Ben found himself nodding agreement before considering full implications. 24 hours blurred past with police interviews, insurance adjusters, and Portland Press Herald reporters asking explosion questions. Authorities seemed reluctant to answer. Official statements mentioned aging gas infrastructure, but Ben noticed rapid scene cleanup and scarce detail sharing from investigating agencies. By evening, Main Street appeared almost normal, except plywood covering damaged windows and lingering smoke smell that clung to everything like unwelcome memories. Ben spent the night staring at his trailer ceiling, listening to Mia's peaceful breathing and replaying Alexis's whispered warning. "Don't trust." But trust whom? And why target sleepy coastal towns where lobster festival budgets generated the biggest controversies? Morning brought conviction that trauma and injury had caused nonsensical utterances, random syllables from concussed consciousness rather than meaningful communication. David Sterling's black town car arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, tinted windows and chrome polish contrasting weathered trailers and practical pickup trucks of Elm Street. Ben dressed in his cleanest shirt and newest jeans, though suspected his presentable and Sterling's operated on different measurement scales entirely. Mrs. Henderson agreed to watch Mia, Ben unwilling to expose his daughter to whatever conversation was approaching. "Be good for Mrs. Henderson. I'll return soon." The car's interior functioned as mobile office, leather seats and built-in bar accompanying phones that rang constantly. Sterling looked like Fortune magazine covers, silver hair perfectly styled, and suit probably worth more than Ben's trailer. "I've researched your background, Mr. Carter. MIT graduate, successful engineering career, unfortunate personal tragedy. Condolences regarding your wife's loss." Jennifer's death mentioned casually, another data point in Sterling's analysis, rather than devastating personal loss that had restructured Ben's entire existence. "Thank you," he managed, though gratitude was furthest from actual feelings. "I'm curious why my background matters." Sterling smiled, without warmth reaching his eyes. "Yesterday you saved my daughter's life, and significant actions often spring from significant people, even those temporarily between opportunities." The pause carried weight, suggesting Sterling viewed current circumstances as temporary setback rather than permanent condition. "I have a proposition, Mr. Carter." Sterling opened leather briefcase, withdrawing thick contract bound in expensive paper. "Site supervisor for Ocean View Resort Project. 150,000 annually, comprehensive benefits, company housing, private school tuition for your daughter, all exchanged for considerable experts and discretion regarding sensitive development aspects." Ben's hands trembled slightly holding the contract, numbers dancing like lottery tickets before his eyes. 150,000 would change everything. Proper schools for Mia, health insurance, real home instead of tin box rattling during coastal storms. Security for his daughter's future. Stability ripped away when Jennifer's car hydroplaned on rain-slicked highways. "This seems extremely generous, but I'm uncertain about discretion meaning." Sterling's smile sharpened, predatory edges emerging. "Simply that environmental assessments and community impact studies require interpretation by someone standing bigger pictures. Bigger pictures might involve steamrolling over communities that had welcomed him and Mia when they possessed nothing. Mrs. Peterson's blueberry muffins and arthritic hands counting 20s. Henderson twins teaching Mia firefly catching in mason jars. Miss Rodriguez bringing extra books when she noticed how quickly his daughter devoured stories. "What exactly are you requesting?" Ben's engineering training emphasized examining structures from multiple angles, searching for weak points and stress factors causing catastrophic failure. "Nothing illegal, I assure you. Simply professional opinions supporting development project interests, helping planning committees understand that progress sometimes requires difficult choices." Ben set the contract down unsigned, mind racing through implications. "If I decline?" Sterling's expression remained unchanged, but something cold flickered behind calculating eyes. "Then you continue your current path, naturally. Small repairs, odd jobs, honest work satisfaction. Though building permits can be challenging to obtain, insurance policies sometimes require review. Zoning compliance proves quite complex for small business owners." Threat delivered with coffee-ordering tone, but Ben heard it clearly enough. Sign and betray his community, or face systematic harassment designed to drive them away from the only place feeling like home since Jennifer's death. "I need time considering this," Ben said, though every instinct was screaming to run. Sterling checked his Rolex with practiced ease. "Of course. Take 24 hours. But remember, opportunities like this rarely come to men in your current position." The car returned Ben to his trailer as Mia came back from morning walks with Mrs. Henderson, pockets full of interesting rocks and face bright with 7-year-old exploration joy. She ran immediately, wrapping arms around his waist with fierce intensity of someone who'd learned too young that loved ones could disappear without warning. "Did you have good meeting, Daddy?" Ben looked down at her trusting face and felt Sterling's contract weight like stones in his chest. "It was interesting, sweetheart. How about we work on that dollhouse kitchen I promised?" That afternoon, while Mia carefully painted tiny wooden chairs with 3 bristle brushes, Ben's mind returned to Alexis's whispered warning. "Don't trust." "But whom?" Sterling, obviously, but the woman worked for Sterling Development according to scattered business cards. Was she warning against her own father? The thought seemed absurd, but nothing about recent days had followed normal patterns. Wealthy daughters didn't usually appear at small-town permit offices, and mysterious explosions didn't typically follow heated conversations about building codes and social hierarchies. Ben was wrestling with these thoughts when soft knocking came at his trailer door. Through the window, he could see a figure in jeans and simple sweater, nothing like yesterday's power suit. Alexis Sterling stood on his small wooden porch, head wrapped in white bandages and face pale but determined. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable than the woman who'd dismissed him so cruelly in City Hall lobby. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry bothering you, but I hoped we could talk." Behind her, a modest Honda Civic sat in his driveway, instead of expected helicopters or town cars. "Miss Sterling." Ben opened the door wider, automatically checking that Mia was safely occupied with painting projects. "How are you feeling? You took quite a hit yesterday." Alexis touched bandages gingerly, wincing slightly. "Concussion, bruised ribs, more stitches than I care counting. But alive, thanks to you. I remember what happened at the permit office before the explosion. I owe you apologies going far deeper than words can express." Ben stepped aside, letting her enter, noting careful movements, obviously still painful from injuries. The trailer felt smaller with both of them inside, and he was acutely aware how humble surroundings must appear to someone accustomed to sterling wealth. "You don't owe me anything. You were hurt, probably not thinking clearly." Alexis shook her head, immediately regretting motion as pain flashed across features. "No excuse. I was cruel because I was angry at someone else entirely, and you and your daughter became convenient targets." Mia looked up from painting, curious about visitors. "Are you the hurt lady Daddy helped?" Her question was direct in ways only children managed, cutting through adult pretense to matters heart. Alexis knelt carefully to Mia's level, expression softening completely. "I am. And I'm very sorry for being mean to you and your daddy yesterday. That was wrong." Mia studied her with serious consideration of someone weighing evidence. "It's okay. Sometimes I'm mean when I'm sad about Mommy. Daddy says feelings are hard sometimes." Simple 7-year-old wisdom seemed to deflate something in Alexis Sterling, carefully constructed composure cracking like ice under spring warmth. "Your daddy sounds very wise," she managed, voice thick with unidentifiable emotions. Standing slowly, addressing Ben over Mia's bent head. "Mr. Carter, I came to thank you properly, but also warn you about something. My father isn't always what he seems. If he's offered you anything, please be very careful about accepting." Ben felt pulse quickening, remembering contract still tucked in jacket pocket. "What kind of warning are we discussing?" Alexis glanced toward Mia, obviously reluctant speaking freely in front of children. Ben understood immediately. "Mia, sweetheart, why don't you take paints outside and work on the porch? Light is better there." His daughter gathered supplies obediently, humming school songs. Once screen door closed behind her, Alexis's mask slipped completely. "My father will try buying you. Job offer, probably quite generous, designed making you dependent on sterling money and willing to overlook things that should never be overlooked." Ben's hand moved unconsciously toward jacket pocket, and Alexis noticed immediately. "He already has, hasn't he? What did he offer?" 150,000 suddenly felt like monopoly money, colorful but ultimately worthless. "Site supervisor position, good salary, benefits, housing." He deliberately omitted discretion and interpretation parts, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. "And all you have to do is sell out the community that welcomed you when you had nothing," Alexis said bitterly. "Sign off on environmental reports ignoring ecological damage, approve construction plans violating zoning laws, turn blind eyes while Sterling Development destroys everything making this place special." Her words hit like physical blows, each confirming worst suspicions about contract's true intentions. "Why are you telling me this? You work for Sterling Development yourself." Alexis laughed, but no humor in the sound. "I work against Sterling Development, Mr. Carter. That's what I was doing at Permit Office yesterday, trying to file injunction-stopping resort project." Pieces began clicking into place with mechanical precision, like tumblers falling in complex locks. "That's why you were there early? Why you had all those legal documents?" Alexis nodded, wincing again as movement aggravated head injury. "I've been fighting this project for months, using every legal avenue I can find. Environmental protection laws, historical preservation statutes, community impact assessments. My father knows, of course, but assumes it's just rebellious phase that money and time will eventually cure." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. He's wrong about that. Ben found himself studying her with new eyes, seeing past designer clothes and inherited wealth to something harder and more determined underneath. "Why fight your own family's business?" Question seemed to pain her more than physical injuries. "Because I've seen what happens to places like Riverside Falls when Sterling Development moves in. Communities existing for generations get turned into wealthy playgrounds, while people who built them get priced out and forgotten." "That's strong accusation against your own father." Ben was still processing revelation that David Sterling's only daughter was apparently his business's most dedicated opponent. Alexis walked to small window overlooking trailer park, gaze taking in modest homes and well-tended gardens, speaking of people making the best from limited resources. 3 years ago, Sterling Development acquired Fishing Village in Nova Scotia. Beautiful place, 500 years maritime history. Locals were assured they'd benefit from increased tourism and economic development. Within 2 years, property taxes tripled. Local fishermen couldn't afford boat slips at new marinas. Grocery stores and hardware shops closed because they couldn't compete with resort amenities. Schools shut down when too many families moved away. Future she was describing sounded like nightmare version of everything Ben had grown to love about Riverside Falls. "And you think same thing will happen here?" Ben asked, though he suspected he already knew answers. Alexis nodded grimly. "Resort project is just phase 1. Sterling has options purchasing most commercial properties on Main Street, plus residential lots throughout town. Mrs. Miller's farm, Henderson family land, even this trailer park. Once resort is operational, property values will skyrocket and property taxes will follow. People like Mrs. Peterson and Miller's will be forced selling to developers or losing homes to tax liens." Ben thought about Mia painting contentedly on porches, finally settled and happy after months of upheaval following her mother's death. The idea of uprooting her again, losing community that had helped them both heal, made his chest tighten with familiar panic. "What can we do stopping it?" Question surprised him even as he spoke it, revealing commitments he hadn't realized he'd already made. Alexis's expression brightened for the first time since she'd arrived. "We need evidence of environmental violations and zoning irregularities. Proof that impact studies were falsified or incomplete. Documentation of bribery or corruption in approval processes." Ben thought about Sterling's casual threats about building permits and insurance policies. "That sounds dangerous." Alexis agreed readily. "It is dangerous. My father doesn't tolerate opposition well, especially from family members. He's already frozen my trust fund and revoked access to company resources, if he discovers we're working together." She let sentences hang unfinished, but Ben could fill in implications. David Sterling struck him as someone who viewed obstacles as things to be removed rather than circumvented. Through windows, Ben could see Mia holding up painted dollhouse chairs for his inspection, face bright with work pride. 7 years old, and already she'd lost mother, home, entire world once. Thought of putting her through more upheaval because of his choices made him want to sign Sterling's contract and forget about community principles. But then he thought about Mrs. Peterson's arthritic hands and Miss Rodriguez's concern for Mia's adjustment, about Henderson twins who'd taught his daughter firefly catching, and how the whole town had quietly conspired, giving them both soft landing places. "What exactly would you need me doing?" Ben asked, knowing he was probably about to make decisions that would change everything for both of them. Alexis reached into her purse and withdrew small device looking like USB drives. Sterling keeps all sensitive project files on private servers at company offices. Financial records, environmental reports, correspondence with government officials. I still have building access, but not computer access. If someone else were to plug this into right terminals... Ben took the device, its small weight feeling much heavier than logic suggested. "You're asking me to commit industrial espionage," Alexis countered. "I'm asking you to help expose criminal fraud. Sterling Development has violated at least 12 federal environmental protection laws and bribed at least 4 local officials to approve permits they should have rejected. Resort project will destroy protected wetlands, contaminate local water supply, eliminate critical habitat for endangered species. What I'm asking is help documenting crimes already being committed." Ben was quiet for several minutes, weighing risks against potential consequences of inaction. Sterling's job offer would solve immediate financial problems, but make him complicit in community destruction. Refusing offers would mean continued financial uncertainty, but preserve integrity and potentially save places that had become home for him and Mia. "If we do this and get caught, what happens to my daughter?" Question cut to heart of his deepest fear, that his choices might somehow hurt persons he loved most in the world. "I won't lie about risks. My father has resources and connections reaching far beyond Riverside Falls. He could make life very difficult for you, professionally and personally. But if we don't try stopping this, your daughter loses her home anyway, along with everyone else mattering to you both." She paused, studying his face carefully. "I know I have no right asking this, especially after the way I treated you yesterday, but I'm running out of people I can trust, and time is running out for this community." Outside, Mia was singing to herself as she painted, clear voice carrying through screen doors like reminders of everything innocent and good in worlds needing protection. Ben looked at USB devices in his palm, then at Alexis Sterling's determined face, scarred now, but somehow more beautiful for showing genuine emotions instead of practiced perfection. "When do we start?" he asked, and saw something like relief flood her features. "Tonight. Security guard makes rounds every 2 hours. If we time it right, we'll have at least 90 minutes downloading what we need." Sterling Development offices occupied top 3 floors of downtown Riverside Falls' newest building, glass and steel architecture standing out against 19th century brick and weathered shingles defining the rest of Main Street. Ben had driven past dozens of times, noting how modern lines seemed to challenge town's traditional character rather than complement it. Now, at 11:30 Tuesday night, the building loomed against star-filled sky like monuments to corporate ambition, most windows dark except security lighting, casting geometric shadows across empty parking lots. Alexis met him at side entrances, bandaged head covered by dark wool caps and movements still careful from injuries. "Keycard still works. My father hasn't revoked building access yet, probably because he assumes I'm too injured causing trouble." Lock disengaged with soft clicks sounding abnormally loud in midnight stillness. Ben followed her into lobbies screaming expensive taste, marble floors, contemporary art, and reception desks probably costing more than his trailer. Elevator rose silently to 15th floors, depositing them in hallways lined with offices whose doors bore brass nameplates and titles speaking of corporate hierarchy. David Sterling's corner office dominated corridor ends, but Alexis led Ben toward smaller rooms marked IT services. "Main server is in here," she whispered, using another keycard gaining access. Banks of computer equipment hummed quietly in climate-controlled darkness, LED indicators blinking like electronic fireflies. This terminal has administrative access to all company files. Ben plugged in USB devices and watched as code lines scrolled across monitor screens, programs automatically locating and copying files according to predetermined search parameters. "How long will this take?" he asked, acutely aware they were committing multiple felonies, and discovery would mean prison for both. 20 to 30 minutes for complete downloads, Alexis replied, settling into chairs beside him. Program is designed prioritizing most sensitive files first, so even if we have to abort early, we should get most important evidence. They waited in tense silence, only sounds quiet server humming and distant late-night traffic rumbles on Route 1. Ben found himself studying Alexis's profile in blue computer screen glow, noting how different she looked from imperious woman who'd dismissed him so cruelly just days earlier. Pain and exhaustion had stripped away polished veneers, revealing someone younger and more vulnerable than expected. "Can I ask something personal? Why do you care so much about this place?" Alexis was quiet so long Ben thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried old grief weight. "My mother grew up in town like this. Coastal Maine, fishing families. Everyone knew everyone else's business for 3 generations back. She used to tell me stories about summer festivals and ice cream socials, about neighbors who helped each other through hard times without being asked." She paused, wiping at eyes that had grown suspiciously bright. "Sterling Development destroyed that town when I was 12. Bought everything, bulldozed everything, turned it into luxury resort. My mother never got over it, never forgave my father for what he'd done to her childhood." Computer chimed softly, indicating downloads were complete. Ben pulled out USB devices and powered down terminals, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and relief combination. "We did it," he said, hardly believing they'd actually succeeded without being caught. Alexis stood carefully, injuries still obviously painful. "This is just beginning. Now we have to analyze what we've found and figure out how to use it effectively. My father will know someone accessed his files within 24 hours. Once that happens, he'll be looking for leaks." They made their way back to elevators, every footstep seeming unnaturally loud in empty buildings. As doors closed behind them, Ben felt strange mixture of accomplishment and terror. They'd successfully stolen potentially incriminating evidence against one of New England's most powerful men, but they'd also declared war on someone with virtually unlimited resources for fighting back. "What's our next step?" he asked as they reached ground floors. "We need somewhere secure reviewing files, somewhere my father won't think to look, at least not immediately." "My workshop. It's behind Murphy's Diner, pretty isolated. And it has internet access if we need uploading anything to secure servers." Alexis nodded agreement, and they separated in parking lots, planning to meet at workshops in 30 minutes. Ben drove home carefully, checking rear-view mirrors frequently for surveillance signs, and feeling increasingly paranoid about every car seeming to follow same routes for more than few blocks. Trailer Park was dark and quiet when he arrived, Mia sleeping peacefully in small bedrooms, completely unaware her father had just committed crimes that could land him in federal prison. Mrs. Henderson had agreed, watching Mia overnight, favors Ben had requested with vague explanations about emergency work needing completion before morning. Elderly woman asked no questions, apparently understanding that sometimes parents needed handling adult business without involving children. Workshop felt different at midnight. Familiar tools and half-finished projects taking on sinister shadows in dim lighting. Ben had installed small computer systems handling business records and customer communications, never imagining he'd use it for corporate espionage and criminal evidence analysis. Alexis arrived exactly on schedule, carrying laptop computers and looking like she'd used drive time, steeling herself for whatever they might discover in stolen files. "Before we start, I want you understanding there's no going back from here. Once we know what's in these files, we become genuine threats to Sterling development and everyone associated with projects. My father doesn't tolerate threats. Ben thought about Mia sleeping peacefully few miles away, trusting that her daddy would make good choices and keep them both safe. I understand, he said, though wondered if anyone could truly understand consequences until they were living through them. First files contained environmental impact assessments submitted to state and federal regulators, technical reports filled with scientific jargon and detailed analyses of soil composition, water quality, and wildlife habitat. At first glance, everything looked legitimate and professionally prepared. But as Alexis highlighted specific sections and cross-referenced them with independent studies, deception patterns began emerging. "Look at this," she said, pointing to paragraphs about groundwater contamination risks. "Official report says minimal impact, but this internal memo admits construction will likely contaminate entire local aquifer." More files revealed similar discrepancies, official documents downplaying environmental risks, while internal communications acknowledged significant dangers to public health and ecological stability. Email exchanges between David Sterling and various government officials contained thinly veiled references to campaign contributions and private consulting contracts, modern equivalent of briefcases full of cash dressed in legal language. "This is enough stopping the project," Ben said, scrolling through page after page of incriminating evidence. "Maybe enough sending your father to prison?" Alexis agreed, though her tone carried more caution than celebration. "But we need to be strategic about how we release this information. If we just dump everything to press, Sterling's lawyers will tie it up in courts for years while construction moves forward. We need finding smoking guns, something so damning and clearly illegal that no amount of legal maneuvering can make it disappear." Ben was beginning to understand that exposing corporate corruption was more complex than simply revealing evidence, that they were entering battlefields where money and influence could override facts and justice. They worked through nights, systematically reviewing thousands of documents and building comprehensive pictures of Sterling Development's systematic fraud. By dawn, they had identified 17 separate federal crimes, including environmental fraud, bribery of public officials, and conspiracy violating protected wetlands regulations. Evidence was overwhelming, but Ben found himself wondering if overwhelming evidence would be enough defeating adversaries who seemed to operate by different rules than ordinary citizens. "We should get some sleep," Alexis said, as morning light began filtering through workshop's single window. "Tomorrow we start figuring out how to use this information effectively." Ben nodded, exhaustion beginning catching up with adrenaline that had sustained him through nights. As Alexis gathered laptop and prepared leaving, she turned back facing him with expressions of deep gratitude. "Thank you for taking this risk, for believing some things are worth fighting for. I know it's not easy, especially with your daughter to consider." "Mia's exactly why I have to do this," Ben replied, realizing as he spoke that words were completely true. "This community gave us home when we needed one most. If I don't fight for it now, what kind of man does that make me? What kind of example am I setting for my daughter?" Alexis smiled, and for first time since he'd met her, expressions reached her eyes. "I think you're setting exactly right kind of example. Your daughter is lucky having you as father." After she left, Ben sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by tools of his trade and evidence of crimes that could reshape their entire community's future. In few hours, he would need picking up Mia and returning to normal routines of breakfast, school, and comfortable rhythms of small-town life. But nothing would ever be quite normal again, because they had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Next week passed with deceptive normalcy, Ben completing furniture repairs and Mia attending school while they secretly worked with environmental lawyers and investigative journalists building airtight cases against Sterling Development. Evidence they'd gathered was compelling, but translating it into effective action required careful strategy and impeccable timing. Meanwhile, David Sterling seemed unaware his most sensitive business secrets had been compromised, though Ben noticed increase in black SUVs driving slowly through trailer parks and unfamiliar faces asking questions at local businesses. Trap was sprung Thursday morning when Ben received phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Carter, this is James Walsh from Sterling Development. Mr. Sterling would like scheduling another meeting with you today, if possible. He's had some time reconsidering your discussion from last week." Voice was polite, but carried undertone, suggesting refusal wasn't really option. Ben agreed, meeting at Sterling's office, knowing this was likely their last chance, maintaining pretense that he was still considering job offers. David Sterling was waiting in corner office, same imposing figure in expensive suit, but something had changed in his demeanor. His smile was sharper, eyes harder, and casual confidence had been replaced by something more predatory. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. I trust you've had time considering our previous conversation." Ben nodded, trying projecting calm while pulse hammered against ribs. "I have some concerns about project's environmental impact. I'd want reviewing assessment reports before making commitments." Sterling's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind eyes. "Of course, due diligence is always wise in business relationships." He opened desk drawer and withdrew thick folder, placing it on polished surface between them. "These are environmental impact studies you requested. I think you'll find them quite comprehensive." Ben reached for folder, but Sterling's hand caught his wrist in grip surprisingly strong for a man in his 60s. "But first, I have a question for you, Mr. Carter. Do you know what happens to people who betray my trust?" Mask had finally slipped completely, revealing predator beneath polished businessman facade. Ben tried pulling hand free, but Sterling's grip tightened with precision of someone who had used physical intimidation before. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ben said, though suspected his poker face wasn't nearly as convincing as hoped. Sterling's smile grew wider, showing teeth seeming too sharp for casual conversation. "Someone accessed my private computer systems 3 nights ago, downloaded files that were supposed to be secure. Naturally, I'm curious about who might have been involved in such unauthorized audit." Ben's heart sank as he realized careful planning had been compromised from beginning. Sterling had been watching his own daughter, tracking her movements and monitoring her activities. Whole theft had been observed and recorded, turning their night of secret triumph into carefully documented evidence of their crimes. "Alexis has every right visiting her family's business," Ben said, though new argument was futile. "She certainly does, though accessing secure computer systems without authorization is federal crime, regardless of family relationships." Sterling released wrist and leaned back in chair, studying Ben with intensity of scientist examining interesting specimen. "What do you want?" Ben asked, abandoning pretense that he didn't understand exactly what Sterling was discussing. Older man's expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction, look of someone who had successfully maneuvered opponent into checkmate. "I want USB device you used, along with any copies of files you may have made. I want signed statement affirming your complete discretion regarding Sterling Development business practices, and I want your cooperation ensuring my daughter faces appropriate consequences for her extremely poor judgment." Last demand hit Ben like physical blow, protective instincts flaring immediately. "What do you mean?" Sterling's smile grew more disturbing, suggesting malice layers Ben was only beginning comprehending. "Criminal prosecution tends to disrupt family stability, as I'm sure you can imagine. You're threatening to destroy your own daughter's life." Ben wanted being absolutely clear about what was being proposed. "I'm pointing out realistic consequences of poor decision-making," Sterling corrected smoothly. Corporate espionage carries significant penalties, but first-time offenders who cooperate fully with investigations sometimes receive more lenient treatment from prosecutors. Implication was clear. Throw Alexis under bus completely, and Ben might avoid worst consequences of their actions. Ben thought about woman who had apologized to his daughter with genuine remorse, who had spent 3 years fighting her own father, honoring dead mother's wishes. Woman who had trusted him with her most dangerous secrets and risked everything protecting community she barely knew. And if I don't cooperate? Sterling's smile turned genuinely friendly for first time since Ben entered office, expression of someone who had just received exactly response he'd been hoping for. Then you'll discover just how far my influence extends. Building permits revoked for safety violations, health department investigations of substandard living conditions, child protective services reports about inadequate supervision and unstable housing. Tax audits tend discovering irregularities in even most honest small businesses. Each threat was delivered with professional precision, systematic dismantling of everything Ben had built since arriving in Riverside Falls. You have 48 hours deciding, Mr. Carter. Return stolen files and sign cooperation agreement, or face full consequences of your extremely poor judgment. Sterling stood and walked to window overlooking town, posture radiating confidence of someone accustomed getting his way through money and intimidation combination. I should mention Alexis has also been given similar choice. It will be interesting seeing which of you values personal loyalty over family welfare. Ben left Sterling's office feeling hollowed out with Spoon, every step taking him further from any possibility of good outcomes. Either he betrayed Alexis and became complicit in Sterling Development's fraud, or risked losing Mia to custody battle he couldn't afford fighting. USB device felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in jacket pocket, carrying hopes of entire community alongside potential destruction of everything he cared about most. He found Alexis waiting in his workshop, face pale and hands shaking slightly. He knows. He's known all along. Security cameras, keycard tracking, probably even phone surveillance. We walked right into trap. Ben nodded grimly, settling into chair across from her workbench. He gave me 48 hours returning files and signing some cooperation agreement. If I refuse, he'll use influence destroying my life and taking Mia away. Words tasted like ash in his mouth, admission of defeat before they'd even really begun fighting. He made me similar offer. Turn over all evidence, testify that you coerced me into helping steal company secrets, and he'll arrange for reduced charges. Plausible deniability, troubled daughter manipulated by desperate single father with nothing to lose. She laughed, but sound carried no humor whatsoever. He's giving us both chance betraying each other while thinking we're protecting ourselves. Classic manipulation tactics. Ben studied her face, looking for signs of calculation that might suggest she was considering Sterling's offer. Instead, he saw determination mixed with exhaustion, expression of someone who had already decided fighting, even if fighting meant losing everything. What do you want to do? I want releasing everything, Alexis said without hesitation. Every file, every email, every piece of evidence we gathered. Upload it to every news organization, environmental group, and law enforcement agency that might be interested. Make it impossible for my father containing damage through legal challenges and political pressure. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, animated by righteous anger that made people do extraordinary things despite impossible odds. That guarantees we both go to prison, Ben pointed out, though found himself admiring her willingness accepting consequences of doing what she believed was right. Maybe, but it also guarantees this community has fighting chance. That Mrs. Miller keeps her farm, Henderson family doesn't lose their home, that your daughter grows up in place that values something besides profit margins. She reached across workbench and covered his hand with hers, skin warm despite cool morning air. I won't ask you sacrificing your daughter for my cause. If you need taking his deal to protect Mia, I'll understand completely. But I can't betray my mother's memory by helping him destroy another community. I won't become complicit in his crimes just to save myself from consequences of fighting them." Ben looked into her eyes and saw something he'd almost forgotten existed. Someone willing doing right things, even when right things carried enormous personal costs. Next 36 hours passed in blur of careful preparation and growing dread. They worked systematically organizing stolen files for maximum impact, creating comprehensive packages of evidence tailored for different audiences, environmental groups, investigative journalists, federal prosecutors, and regulatory agencies. Ben found himself constantly checking on Mia, memorizing sound of her laugh and way she unconsciously stuck out tongue when concentrating on difficult homework problems, storing up memories against possibility they might be separated. On Friday evening, 12 hours before Sterling's ultimatum expired, Ben and Alexis met final time in workshop that had become their unofficial headquarters. Evidence packages were ready for simultaneous release to over 30 different organizations, timed going public before Sterling could obtain injunctions or use political pressure suppressing revelations. "Once we do this, there's no going back," Ben said, finger hovering over send button that would change everything for both of them. "There was no going back moment we decided fighting him," Alexis replied, voice steady, despite magnitude of what they were about to unleash. "My father has spent entire career destroying communities like this one, counting on people being too afraid or too powerless stopping him. Maybe it's time someone showed him that some things can't be bought or intimidated." Ben thought about Mia painting dollhouse furniture with fierce concentration, about Mrs. Peterson's arthritic hands, and Miss Rodriguez's concern for his daughter's happiness. "For Riverside Falls," he said, and pressed send. Response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Sterling Development was facing investigations from Environmental Protection Agency, Securities and Exchange Commission, and FBI. Environmental groups filed emergency injunctions, halting construction pending full reviews of falsified impact studies. Portland Press Herald ran front-page story with headline, "Local development giant accused of massive environmental fraud," while national news organizations picked up story for morning broadcasts. David Sterling's response was swift and predictably vicious. By Saturday afternoon, Ben had been served papers for federal lawsuit alleging corporate espionage, criminal trespass, and conspiracy committing industrial sabotage. Child Protective Services investigators appeared at Mrs. Henderson's trailer, demanding inspecting Mia's living conditions and asking pointed questions about Ben's fitness as parent. Building inspector condemned his workshop for supposed safety violations, forcing him shutting down Carter Woodworks indefinitely. But something unexpected happened as Sterling's retaliation machinery ground into motion. Community that had quietly welcomed Ben and Mia 6 months earlier began mobilizing in their defense. Mrs. Peterson organized legal defense fund, standing outside grocery store with coffee can and handwritten sign asking for donations. Miss Rodriguez wrote letter to State Education Department praising Ben's involvement in Mia's schooling and questioning motives behind custody challenges. Henderson family hired lawyer contesting building inspector's findings, arguing workshop met all applicable safety standards. Most surprisingly, Mayor Brennan, same official Sterling claimed owed him favors, announced his support for full investigation of all Sterling Development projects within city limits. "If these allegations are true," he said at emergency town meeting, "then we've all been victims of fraud on massive scale. This community deserves better than being sold out to developers who view us as nothing more than obstacles to profit." Ben began understanding that David Sterling's influence, while extensive, wasn't absolute when confronted with community refusing to be intimidated. Legal battles stretched through fall and into winter, complex dance of motions and counter-motions consuming most of Ben's savings and testing everyone's patience. Sterling's lawyers were skilled and ruthless, attacking every piece of evidence and challenging every witness with scorched-earth tactics money could buy. But evidence itself was overwhelming, and federal investigators seemed genuinely committed, pursuing justice regardless of Sterling's political connections. Alexis faced her own legal challenges, but her decision cooperating fully with investigators while refusing to implicate Ben earned her plea agreement, avoiding prison time in exchange for testimony against Sterling Development's systematic fraud. Her father disowned her publicly, cutting off all financial support and removing her from inheritance considerations, but she seemed lighter somehow, as if shedding his expectations had freed her becoming person she'd always wanted to be. Turning point came in February, when David Sterling himself was arrested on charges of environmental fraud, conspiracy committing bribery, and obstruction of justice. Evidence Ben and Alexis had stolen provided foundation for case Sterling's expensive lawyers couldn't explain away or dismiss. Standing in handcuffs outside federal courthouse, he looked smaller somehow, diminished by revelation that money and influence couldn't protect him from consequences of systematic criminality. Ocean View Resort project was officially cancelled in March, permits revoked, and environmental impact studies declared fraudulent by federal regulators. Sterling Development filed bankruptcy within weeks, assets frozen pending criminal proceedings outcomes. Town of Riverside Falls found itself free, determining its own future, unburdened by threats of corporate colonization disguised as economic development. Ben stood in his rebuilt workshop on warm May morning, putting finishing touches on custom dining table for Portland family. Carter Woodworks had not only survived Sterling's attempts destroying it, but actually grown during months of legal warfare, as customers throughout Maine sought him out specifically because of his role exposing corporate fraud. Mia played in morning sunshine outside, dollhouse now complete with furniture, inhabitants, and even tiny garden made from moss and pebbles. "Daddy, look!" she called, holding up letter that had arrived in morning's mail. "Miss Alexis sent us postcard from Boston." Ben opened card and found picture of harbor where he'd once worked as structural engineer, back when his life had been entirely different. Alexis's message was brief but warm. New job with State Environmental Protection Agency. Finally using trust fund education for something worthwhile. Thank you both for showing me what real courage looks like. That evening, as Ben tucked Mia into bed he'd built for her in small house they now rented on Maple Street, she asked question that had been on his mind all day. "Daddy, do you think Miss Alexis will come visit us again soon?" Ben thought about woman who had apologized to his daughter with genuine remorse, who had risked everything protecting community she barely knew, who had chosen principle over comfort when choice mattered most. "I think she will," he said, kissing Mia's forehead. "And I think when she does, we'll all be exactly where we're supposed to be." Outside their window, lights of Riverside Falls twinkled like earthbound stars. Community that had found courage, fighting for itself, and discovered some things truly were worth protecting. Sometimes best victories were quietest ones, communities that remained themselves, children who grew up feeling safe, and people who learned that standing up for what's right was always worth the cost, no matter how high that cost might be.